Here is our agenda for today. After some background information, we are going to go into tribally responsive and community-based approaches to mental health, and then practical strategies and tools of prevention, then action planning and next steps, and then a closing by our guest expert presenter, Cortney. These are our learning objectives. Our first objective is to illuminate how mental health challenges affect tribal youth and how that leads to juvenile justice involvement. And our second objective is to provide strategies, resources, and tools for prevention and diversion efforts. Now back to Ethleen.
Thank you, Toshka. So, in order to look at our mental health challenges among our tribal youth and also to look at practical strategies, resources, tools, we really need a framework or worldview. So, this framework here that I am showing is an example from the Lakota people, and I can only speak from the Lakota people. This framework speaks to the four stages of life in the Lakota worldview. So we believe that we come from the spirit world and that we're sent here. So I believe wholeheartedly that each one of you was sent here to this world from the Creator for a specific purpose, that you all have skills, talents, and strengths, and that you are blessings from the Creator. And this is a very important message to give to our youth so that they will understand that they have a purpose in life or purposes. So, whenever they come from the spirit world and the young mother first knows that she's pregnant, then the relatives come together. Look at the bottom of the slide. Wotakuye is a Lakota word for kinship, and it's the foundation of Lakota society. It's the glue that holds us together. It's how we've survived for thousands of years to where we're at today. We still have our language, we still have our ceremonies, we still have each other. So, and that was done through really honoring the kinship system. So the relatives would come together and they would make prayers and they would make ceremonies for the young woman, the pregnant woman, and her partner and the developing baby. And that would be done throughout her pregnancy. When the baby was born, then the grandmother was the first person to touch the baby because her touch was from love and from cherishing this child who was the future of the people. So she would sing to the baby, she would welcome baby, she would make a prediction, she would make a prayer. And the arrows that you see inside the blue circle, those indicate the path that she is pointing the child toward. This is where you're going. Takoja. So in our Lakota language, that is grandchild. Grandchild, you're going to be strong. You're going to be a leader. You're going to be generous and kind. So, what she's doing is marking the spiritual path for him or her to follow. And throughout that first stage of life, from the time the child is in the womb to the time that the child reaches the age of transition, which for the females, it's the first monthly purification. For the males, it's the first, whenever the voice changes from a high tone to a deeper tone, then those were indications that they needed further direction. And that was done through ceremonies. Ishnati awichalompi. They sing for her that dwells alone. The female rite of passage ceremony among the Lakota people. For the males, it was Wichasha Ihunipi, becoming a man, a male rite of passage. So the male relatives would come together and they would share the teachings about becoming a strong Lakota man. They would take him on a hunt. For the females, the female relatives would come together and teach her about becoming a strong Lakota woman. And then they would have a ceremony to celebrate, and they would present them to the people and say, she's no longer a little girl, she's a young woman. He's no longer a little boy, he's a young man. They would have a giveaway, they would have a feast, they would celebrate. So within that first stage of life, there's other ceremonies that we don't have time to really discuss here, but the point of it is that they were celebrated throughout their lives. Whenever they were first known to be in the womb, whenever they came to earth, whenever they took their first step, said their first word, they would have a dinner, they would have a celebration. They would do other ceremonies, a naming ceremony to further ground them in their cultural identity. They would let them know that they were cherished and that they were treasures to them, to the people. And so by the time they reached the age of transition, then they were in a state of very high self-esteem, high self-confidence, and then they were celebrated again for making the transition. And so, whenever they were given these teachings, they were given tools to navigate the rest of the stages of life. So, by the time they reached the third stage of life, then they would have, when they entered into a partnership, marriage, a relationship, then they were strong enough to enter into that. They were strong enough to become parents. And then, whenever they reached the fourth stage, they would transition into becoming a strong elder. The role includes providing teachings, ensuring social order, observing custom law, and observing spiritual order. And then one day, maybe 90, 100, 110 years old, no sickness, no trauma, they would go back to the spirit world. They would go to sleep, go back to the spirit world, their journey on earth completed. Now, this framework is offered because we understood and we were given teachings that in order to have balance and wellness in all aspects of our lives, the physical, the mental, emotional, and the spiritual, then we had to have some type of process or self-governance. And within this worldview, then we have our seven sacred laws. We call them Wo'oke Shakoi. And then we have our seven sacred ceremonies. We have our kinship system, our governance system that are all based on being in balance with all of creation, not just with humans, but with our animal relatives, our winged relatives, our plant, star nation relatives. So this framework is what we in some of the relatives that I work with in my community is what we use to remind us that we have a role in making sure that these ceremonies happen for our children and our young people so that they will have balance and they will be able to realize their dreams. So think about that as we go through the rest of the um, material here, the presentation from my relatives that are going to be talking. Think about a framework in your own culture, your own worldview, and how this information can be used to strengthen the world, the life of our young relatives that have mental health challenges, not only them, but also their families and communities. So, next slide, please, Toshka. So, if you look at the research, then this is what we're up against. So, the disadvantage, for example, fuels hopelessness and delinquency. So, there's some authors there that some researchers that have shared this information about, what is it that leads to, for example, mental health challenges, early hardship, minority status, being justice involved. So we can probably talk a lot about, the research that's out there that shows, what is leading to the mental health challenges among our youth. But more importantly, we need to also talk about responses. We also need to talk about strategies and tools. So I will turn it over to my relatives that will be talking about those things. Thank you.
Thank you, Tui, for sharing that information with us and sharing your time with us. When we look at mental health landscape for addiction and youth, we see disparities that are not an accident. They are a result of generational trauma, historical barriers to care. Our suicide rate for Native youth between the ages of 15 and 19 are twice as much as national average. What does that tell us? It tells us not only about our individual pain, but about our community level of impact that haven't been fully addressed. We also see high rates of substance use in mental health disorder. Nearly 1 in 10 Native youth faces both challenges at the same time, which often means there's a need for more complex than the help that they are given. Native youth experience childhood experience at 2 to 3 times the rate of their peers. These experiences compound trauma and reinforces cycles of harm unless early intervention is available. What this all adds up to is the simple truth. Healing for Native youth must be culturally grounded. Culture is not an option. It is foundation to wellness. Next slide, brother. Intergenerational trauma is not just a concept. It is a lived reality in Native communities. It is a result of policies that disrupt families, languages, ceremonies in our homelands. Those losses didn't just affect one generation. They echo across time in the form of disconnection, grief, and stress that the young people continue to carry today. Mental health struggles in Native youth cannot be understood without acknowledging this historic and ongoing trauma. Next slide, brother. Another layer of harm comes from how our system responds or fails to respond to Native youth. Indigenous youth are nearly 4 times more likely to be placed in juvenile detention than white youth, often for similar or lower offenses. Once involved in the system, most Native youth presents with untreated and undiagnosed mental health needs. The system identifies those symptoms but doesn't address those causes. And because the justice system relies heavily on conformment rather than support, youth often leave with more trauma than when they got there. This is why upstream culture-based prevention matters so much. We want to keep youth connected to our community and to our way, not a system. Next slide, brother. Next slide. Despite the challenges of our indigenous communities, hold powerful strengths that protect youth from harm. Tom Cortney identified, knowing your people, your land, your language is one of the strongest protective factors for mental health. Like our kinship in all communities. We all have kinship. Our kinship system creates networks of support that buffers youth from stress, like our aunties, our uncles, our grandparents, and our community mentors. Ceremonies, language help build reliance and restore balance. These practices give our youth meaning, belonging, and direction, and love. In our community, defined evidence shows what communities have always known. Culture itself is prevention. Next slide, brother. When working with Native youth, we have to acknowledge the full picture, both culture, are both the challenges they face and the strength they bring. The challenges include historic trauma, culture disconnection. These are not individual failings, they are systemic conditions. But the strengths are equal real. Native youth are resistant, reliant. They are deeper connected to our kinship and community. They draw strength from our culture, our land, and identity. Wellness approach must elevate both sides of the picture, addressing trauma while empowering culture and strength. These images remind us that healing for our Native youth isn't confined to the classroom or clinic. It's rooted in land, relationship, experiences that create belonging. Next slide.
Thank you so much, brother, for your words. Now we are going to talk about tribally responsive and community-based approaches to mental health. Okay. So when we talk about early intervention support, it's important to meet youth where they are before challenges turn into crisis. You know, when communities identify concerns early and we respond with this culturally grounded care, youth stay connected, supported, and on a healthy path. When we talk about collaborative community care, we believe that healing happens in relationship. Collaborative care brings together families, schools, health providers, cultural leaders, and tribal systems, you know, to really create that wraparound support. And, you know, that reflects community values and shared responsibility. And that's something that we should strive for in our youth programs and as we are, you know, serving our kids. When we talk about healing through culture with youth programming and elder support, our youth programs are medicine. They're grounded in language, like Brother Craig said, tradition and ceremony, you know, and we need to talk about how elders are an amazing resource in our communities. You know, just their presence provides guidance, stability, and it's like a living connection to our ancestral strength. And these are key factors in mental and emotional wellness. Um, Next slide. Back to you, brother.
Sorry, I was on mute. So when we minimize system involvement requires approach that are culture and community driven. Healing ceremonies, like brother was talking about, reconnecting the youth and identifying values and spiritual grounding. They restore balance and help our youth feel part of something meaningful. Family-based therapy strengths the entire support system around a young person in many Native communities. Healing happens with the family, not separated from it. culture camps are powerful prevention tools, providing youth with hands-on culture learning, time on the land, on the Unchima call Mother Earth, and opportunities to build confidence in identity. These experience reduces long-term risk and support positive pathway forward. Next.
Thank you, Toshka. So how can we respond? We talked a little bit about the challenges, the research, what leads to mental health challenges, mental imbalance challenges. There are some tools out there. There's some curriculum out there that we can cite here, but there's a lot more. Like there's I think a thinking or a line of thinking out there that the culture is medicine, and I think the Toshkas, touched on that. Where what is it that's going to restore balance? How are we going to respond to youth with mental health challenges? This slide here talks a little bit about two resources, well, actually three. American Indian Life Skills is a school-based curriculum, strengthens protective factors. It's designed to reduce suicide risk, and maybe some of you are familiar with that. I think there is, well, I know there is training involved in and offered as an opportunity to be a facilitator in American Indian Life Skills. There's also Project Venture. It's an evidence-based program. It's based on experiential activities. It lowers risk behaviors, including substance use and violence. They really focus on leadership. I did take the training some years ago and was really impressed how they did not use words like, or terms like anger management, or they didn't use terms like, that youth is suicidal. They didn't use labels. What they focused on was the strengths and the leadership potential of youth. And that was something that really resonated with the youth. And so every year they have a lot of camps, different places. I think the parent company is National Indian Youth Leadership Program, and you can look that up. But again, you're going to get a copy of these slides. The third one, Our Life, I'm not as familiar with that. It's culturally based. It addresses trauma, violence, substance use disorder. So these are just three of the tools that are out there, but there, like I said, there's many more. And within your own communities, within your own cultures, there's opportunities to reconnect the youth with their culture so that they can be restored to balance and be strong mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. So I wanted to share that. And back to you, Toshka Jordan.
Thanks, Auntie. Now we're going to get into the strategies and tools for prevention with our honored guest and expert, Cortney.
Wow, those are some big words there.
I thought I'd throw a little more in there.
Well, I'm just happy to be a guest and relative and fellow fellow support across Indian country, and so glad to be here today with you and kind of build on what's already been shared. Some amazing messaging already, some amazing learning, and a great foundation. Great foundation to build off of and to learn. I was taking a few notes. So I got some notes that I prepared for my slides here, but then I started taking some notes as relatives here were sharing, and I'm going to refer back to them because there was a couple of words that I wanted to pull out. One of them distinctly was Brother Craig talked about community-defined evidence. He mentioned community-defined evidence. In our tribal communities, you look at how we access resources, right? We try to support our young people and support our families and our communities. And the way traditionally these resources have been accessed and been available to our tribes and our leadership to help and support, they always come in the form of grants, right? Not all the time, but when there are those federal grant dollars or those grant dollars, wherever they might be coming from, we always get these grant opportunities that talk about using culture, encouraging using culture, which is really a newer thing. But before that, it's always been around using evidence-based practices. And so one of the challenges that we've seen across Indian country and developing programming and using those grant dollars is, how do we combine that? How do we address that request of using evidence-based practices? Because we understand that it's there for a reason, right? It's a good reason. We want to make sure that the interventions that we're using have evidence to support their effectiveness. Unfortunately, we understand that a lot of times that evidence wasn't necessarily gathered within communities that are reflective of the communities that we're working with. Then on the flip side, it always talks about culture, integrate culture. And again, this is a newer kind of requirement or request that we're seeing from grants. And that's in response to a lot of advocates, right? Saying, hey, we need to, sharing all of these teachings that we're sharing today, that culture is prevention, culture is medicine. And so now we're seeing in our grants that we can offer culture. But again, it's how do we do it, right? So one of the terms that was used, Brother Craig used, was community-defined evidence. Now, community-defined evidence, I love that, because what it does is it acknowledges evidence-based evidence, right? But it also acknowledges the strength and the knowledge and wisdom of the community. And that strength and knowledge of the community that you're working within has that knowledge and wisdom to define what works well in their community. So now we start looking at this idea of community-defined evidence. Now it opens up the door to the rest of the things that we're going to talk about here in this remaining section. But it really provides a great opportunity for our communities to have engagement, to have voice and choice, and to take ownership of not only the challenges that we're addressing, but to take ownership of the solutions, right? And so I love that term, community-defined evidence. I just wanted to say a little bit about that. Okay. Now back to our bullet points that we have. Oh, I'm still on the same slide. Sorry, I got off track there. A little bit of tangent, but I'm back now. So when we talk about, again, that community-defined evidence, we talk about leveraging our existing strengths in the community. The first concept or idea, perspective is that there are strengths in the community, right? There's a lot of strengths in the community that are there. And we're a lot of us are familiar with this term, historical trauma, but we're also understand that the resilience, right? The through line of resilience that has allowed our folks to thrive and to continue to practice and to continue to learn about who we are, right? That resilience, that really is at the heart of that strength that we find within our communities. So again, when we're doing this kind of work, we're not taking that deficit perspective, right? We're taking a strengths-based perspective. We recognize that those, again, it was already shared, but just kind of reinforced that our traditional practices, our ceremonies, those stories, those teachings, they're not just cultural activities, right? They are protective factors. They are those strengths, that resilience, that is a reflection of who we are. Always one definition, we always talk about culture and using culture, right? We got all these different catchphrases now. Culture is medicine, culture is prevention, and it's really good. I had elders that have and mentors that have guided and provided some insight that I like to share with this word culture. We can look up a lot of different definitions of what culture might mean. It'll talk about things like foods and clothes and language and worldview, which is all encompassing of that. But I had some of these elders, these mentors, provide this knowledge that culture is how we practice our truths. Culture is how we practice our truths, and that if you look at how we practice our truths, the practice of it, the songs, the language, the dress, the food, how we gather, all the different that framework and those ceremonies that was shared at the beginning, that Ethleen shared, those practices there, right? There's truth to them, and we're practicing those truths. That's culture. That's what culture means. And so it holds a lot of power, a lot of power. And so with that allows us to ask a question. That allows us to ask why we're doing something. Not only are we practicing it, but we can begin to learn why we're doing these things. The why behind it is that truth behind it. And that truth is where that resilience is. That truth is where what's going to continue to uplift and help our young people. And so now we think about these concepts, these broad concepts, and we're thinking about how we're planning and integrating. And again, it's amazing, right? And I can't tell you right now the right or wrong way to do it, because all that knowledge and wisdom comes from your community. When we engage elders, our cultural mentors, our language programs, using community gatherings such as powwows, feasts, school events, all of these community events, right? Those are wonderful places where we can share knowledge, wisdom, information, education. We can share messages of hope. We can normalize conversations of wellness. We can also make connections with trusted helpers, cultural resources. And even now when we get into, we're talking about the prevention of suicide or substance use, or all these different things that afflict our young people and families, crisis services or other services. We can make connections there at these places. And they're natural places where we gather as family. That's the one thing about our traditional, our tribal people. When we have our gatherings, typically they're for all ages. They're for all ages, which invites that good feeling, that good understanding of how to be together in community. All right, now we can go to the next slide. So once we're there, once we're gathered in community, once we are engaging in community, we have that opportunity to strengthen our natural support systems. So what are natural support systems, right? Natural support systems are those people in our community that we go to, that we trust. Those people that when something when there's a loss in the community, there's always those folks that come and that show up and they bring food. There's always those that come and comfort, offer a prayer, maybe whatever it might be. They're we call them natural helpers or natural support systems. Share a quick story. A little over 20 years ago, I started my career as a social worker, working with the National Suicide Prevention Resource Center. And at the time, there was a community that experienced several completed suicides. And the tribe called for an emergency, a state of emergency. And what that did was that triggered a lot of federal dollars and other folks all over the nation to flood into this community and begin providing resources, right? Showing up. So as an employee of the this National Resource Center, I was deployed as well. When we got to this community, I learned of all these different meetings, leadership meetings that were happening. I got on the agendas. I started to attend all week long. For a whole week, we were meeting, right? I began to look around, and I began to look in these meetings, and I began to wonder, who are some of these people sitting around, right? And we had leaders of programs, we had leaders of national programs, leaders of a few local programs. One day on my way to one of these meetings, I stopped to get some coffee. As I stopped to get coffee, I always remember this group of young men, teenage boys, young men, young adults. They were in there, they were laughing, they were enjoying themselves, getting along, grabbing some soda, some water, some snacks. I got to visiting with them, right? And turns out what they were doing, they were gathering wood, because I saw they had a truck bed full of wood, flatbed full of wood. We started visiting, and they said, well, we're having a sweat over here, having a sweat lodge ceremony. And we gathered wood for this sweat, and it's for this family. And they talked about this family, and that family was of one of the families of one of the young people that they had lost, that had completed suicide. These young boys, they invited me to come to the sweat. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to go because I had these meetings to attend. The point of the story is, we had these meetings going on with all these important people, yet our natural helpers that were gathering wood, going out, being present, doing something to support these families. These are the ones that we need to engage. These are the young people. These are the people of all ages that show up to support and help those that are in need, our family members. So these are our natural support systems when we talk about natural support systems. Examples that we have here, they can be, let's see, bus drivers, coaches, aunties, teachers, peers. They can look all kinds of different ways, right? Because we come in all kinds of different ways. We're in community together. So when we strengthen these natural support systems, we can leverage trainings, we can leverage education, we can leverage knowledge and wisdom, and we can provide that for our folks that are there to support one another. A few sample trainings, which we might see here, is we have an example of youth mental health first aid. Youth mental health first aid, or mental health first aid, that is very similar to very similar to first aid, only for mental health and behavioral health issues. So you don't necessarily become the clinician, but you learn enough to recognize that something is wrong. You learn enough to intervene, to ask questions, to be there and be a caring relative, and you learn enough to connect them with the resource. That's what these natural helpers do. And so that's the role of this particular curriculum, Youth Mental Health First Aid. There's also peer mentoring and youth advisory councils. Our young people, they want to help, they want to be there, they want to support, they want to make something, right? So let's invest in them, invest in our young people, invest in their efforts. When we talk about sustainability, we're developing these programs. A lot of times our mentality is we have to sustain the program. But really, why are we doing these programs? We're creating programs and opportunities for a shift in behavior, for a shift in movement in the community. We're trying to do something positive in that community. That shift, that movement, that behavior change is what we need to sustain. And we sustain that by investing in the young people. We sustain that by investing in the people. Programs are great. They're the vehicles that help us move these things along. But vehicles change over time. And only the people in the community can tell us what they need and what vehicle that we need at that particular time. So remember that as we're thinking about sustainability, it's about how are we investing time, energy, and resource into these young people, into our community members, and engaging them. Let's see our other bullet point here. Again, creating our safe spaces and for expression through cultural activities, art, storytelling, and sports. Whatever that positive outlet is to gather people, it can come in all shapes and forms. I was even talking to a young person. I didn't even know they still did this. But there's young people that still gather and play this board game called Dungeons and Dragons. It's probably about 20, 30 years old, but there's groups that still do that, right? But having a group of people coming together, creating a safe space, positive space, we can share education and learn how to support one another. So strengthening our natural support systems. All right, now I'm ready for our next slide. Again, a lot of times when we're developing programs or trying to address issues in our communities, I know oftentimes we look for those resources that are available, right? These 3 bullet points, we want to think about it in terms of low cost and high impact tools. What are some low cost and high impact tools that we could leverage, that we can help build that infrastructure within our communities so that they can lean on? The first one that I'd like to talk about is our what we have on the left side of the screen is creating resource maps of local and virtual supports. So this is a very low hanging fruit, right? This is something that we can do today, is we can get out there and we can think, all right, what are the resources available in our community locally? And what are the resources maybe regionally or nationally that we could leverage as well? There's the 988 number. That's a national hotline number, but it's also regionally organized. And so you connect to those crisis services within your region. So maybe you're in a program position where you can pick up the phone and call your regional hotline, 988 regional hotline. Again, that's for crisis support, mental health crisis support. Maybe you can call them and create some partnerships. Maybe there's resources locally that you are aware of or are part of. Maybe sit on the board, advisory, whatever it might be, that you can connect to this 988 number, because maybe this 988 number is still growing and trying to identify the resources that are available. Because what they are is they will, when somebody calls in anonymous or somebody calls in, they will reach somebody at 988 that'll provide support, be somebody that they can confide in. And then if necessary, they'll connect them with resources that'll help them. So 988, that's that national hotline for the prevention of suicide, national hotline for mental health crisis. Another one that we have on here is the Native and Strong resource. That's a national resource developed out of the Northwest Portland Area Health Board and one of their youth initiatives. And it is full of amazing resources that are available for young people and families. And so there's even a text line that you can sign up for, and they give you periodic, at least maybe once a day or every other day. I think there's you can join this text line and they can send you messages of hope and then link to resources. So there's all kind of different opportunities here. Local resources. You think about those not only those clinical type service resources that might be in your community, but also those natural helpers and even those traditional healers or those folks in the community that are there to provide those more traditional approaches to supporting a person that might be experiencing a mental health crisis or whatever the situation might be. I know that our tribal people, through various ceremonies, they have ceremonies to help. That's what ceremonies are for. They're to help us live this life. And there's a ceremony for a lot of different things. And so when we seek out those people and we engage those healers in our communities and explain what we're doing and how we would like to connect them. They're going to help us. They'll guide us. So traditionally, you got to find out how that operates within your community, right? Just basically, at a base understanding, you're going to want to probably offer something, right? You're going to want to probably create a relationship there. And so, but that's something that you can explore at a more personal level in your area. Another low-cost, high-impact tool is this screening, right? Screening, or what we have here is a screening called SBIRT. And it's simply what that is. That's an acronym: Screening and Brief Intervention and Referral to Treatment. And this process or framework can be implemented through training, and it can be implemented within schools, youth programs, anywhere that we gather and bring people in. And what it is, it's learning how to screen, do a brief intervention, which that brief intervention is typically motivational interviewing, which is a sit-down interview to find out a little bit more information. And the person doing the brief intervention learns skills, how to encourage a person that might be experiencing an issue, encouraging them to reach out for help that they want to, so they'll want to get help. So that way they're not forcing them or manipulating them, but they're encouraging them to go after help. And then we make that referral to treatment if necessary. So it's just a framework that can be implemented. Now, I want to say a quick word on this idea of screening, especially when it comes to Indian country, when it comes to our tribal communities. Again, everything I share are gifts that have been shared by others, mentors and guides that say, that want us to share this information. I was lucky and blessed enough to thank you, Aaron. I see your comment. Yes, SBIRT is a great tool to identify appropriate eligible or youth healing to wellness court services. So it's a great tool. So a quick word on screening. I was honored and privileged to work on a project around screening with one of our tribal communities in the Northwest territories. And we're trying to screen for the risk of suicide in this community, and nobody wanted to be a part of the screening. Instead, we got a lot of feedback. So from that feedback, we took that back and we said, well, we probably need to go and ask the community, what are the interpretations of screening and how does this need to be done? Because the assumption is that the assumption is that the community does want to help. They want to help those in need. It's just the tools or the screening tools that we're using might not be appropriate. That was the assumption. And so, but what we found out in these community conversations is that screening, there's in this Western world, that there's too much emphasis on the screening tool. Yes, the screening tools are important, and they're important. They're done with fidelity. However, when we're implementing screening within our tribal communities, the most important thing is the relationship between the screener and the person that you're asking questions to. The relationship and that space that you build. In the community, they labeled the space. They said this is a sacred space because you're asking somebody, you're giving them the opportunity to reach out for help. So that becomes a door that you're opening, and that's a sacred time. It's a sacred space. So the guidance was, if you're going to do any kind of screening within a tribal community, for those that are conducting the screening the screening tools, how are you preparing yourself to enter into a sacred space? Do what you need to do so that you can enter that space and it doesn't become a checkbox, but it becomes a space where you're creating a relationship, where you're creating trust, where you're creating an opportunity for somebody to reach out for help. So that was the main takeaway. So I always like to share that when we talk about screening, because that's important when we're talking about the application of screening within tribal communities. Another tool that we have, low-hanging fruit with high impact tool, or low cost with high impact tool, is utilizing telebehavioral health and mobile crisis teams to bridge service gaps. We live in a day and age now where we can utilize this technology. And especially when we're talking about our young people, right? Some of our young people, they connect with this technology. And it's really a great way to access supports and help. So find out what those telebehavioral health services are. Find out about the crisis teams that are available in your area. Link with them, learn how to use them, how to connect with them, how to leverage them. Be a part of those crisis teams. Again, it's members in your resources in your community that respond to an immediate crisis, and that's what we need. Let's see, let me look at the time. All right, let's go to our next slide. As we talk about community engagement and shared decision making. Again, we kind of talked a little bit about this. We've kind of been laying the foundation for this. Like, what does this mean when we're talking about community engagement and shared decision making? Yes, we want to involve community members, youth, elders, cultural leaders, but we want to involve them and engage them in meaningful and purposeful ways, right? So there's some examples here: advisory or decision-making roles, right? Youth councils. We want to ensure that the policies and the practices reflect that local knowledge, wisdom, traditional values. When we think about, again, engagement, it's not a checkbox. It's not something that's, oh yeah, we did that, right? Or, oh, we have one of those on our board, right? It's about relationship. It's about relationship. And again, Ethleen talked about this when she opened us up, the importance of relationship. Relationship between individuals, people, but also relationship within your community and relationship to how things operate. And so that relationship is critical. So whenever you're again, with a mind on sustainability, if you want anything sustained, you want a strong relationship with your community, and you do that by meaningfully and purposefully engaging your community and their voice and their choice. You engage your community members in planning, in development, in implementation, and evaluation. They can help us interpret data in a way that it's meaningful to the community. So then you take that data and it's meaningful, purposeful for the community, and you continue this process and you continue to build out. That's how your community members are telling you which vehicle is necessary at the appropriate times, because your programs are going to evolve and change over time. Those opportunities change as you get that community involvement. So again, it's critical when we talk about meaningful and purposeful community engagement. So it's more than just menial tasks, right? I know when I was young, they'd have youth groups or bring youth along, and I'm going back years now, but youth, we'd be sitting there stuffing envelopes or something, right? So now we have learned that meaningful youth engagement is having our young people voice their opinions, be a part of a decision making, and helping us even evaluate the impact of the programs. Again, it'll help. That voice helps influence and strengthen policies and practices. Let's see, our last bullet point. Yes, it's a two-way process. It's not just input, but it's a shared ownership and accountability. That's what we're talking about here. So the main question that we should always be asking is who is helping to decide and who holds the power in the process. So again, meaningful engagement.
Well, Scott, Courtney, can I make a quick note here?
Please do.
Yeah, I was thinking about, that first bullet and how important it is to think about other, how would we say this? Other entities, maybe?
Mhm.
I won't name them, but I am aware of one of the programs that has on their advisory committee their drum.
Mm.
So their drum has a name, the drum has a spirit,
Yeah.
and they take direction, encouragement, enlightenment, insight from the heartbeat of the drum, from the songs of the drum, and um, out out there, then they might say, well, you know, how do you, how can that be? Because it seems like it's outside of the proverbial box, but it's not for us. It's perfectly
Mhm.
rational, and it's perfectly, how would you say, it makes sense. So I wanted to acknowledge that also, that sometimes we think about decision making and engagement in terms of human beings when we can gather insight, encouragement, decision making, help with decision making from our relatives, the birds and the water and the drum, the songs. Just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. No, you're absolutely, yes. Um, you're one of my teachers as well. So, but thank you for reminding us and grounding in that, because that is so true. And again, thinking about that way of understanding culture, culture is how we practice our truths. When we learn about our culture, we learn about those relatives, right? We learn about our relatives, maybe the drum, those songs, maybe there's a whistle or whatever it might be within your culture, whatever those instruments, those sacred objects are, right? There's meaning, purpose, and there's truth behind them. There's a reason why they're practiced. And so thank you. Okay, well, let's move on. I think I have another slide here. I want to talk about partnerships. Yeah, partnerships. So we can't do this alone, right? Yeah, we can't do this alone. That's why they call it a system of care. So multiple parts of the system working together in a coordinated fashion so that we can support our young people, our families, our community members. We thrive together. When we work together, we thrive together. Real impact happens when partners across sectors, when they work together with shared values and clear roles, right? I know it's easier said than done, because in our day-to-day checklist of activities, we get pulled in a lot of different directions. But taking the time to really connect with our partners and understand who we are, our shared values that we have, and the roles and how we can complement one another, and codify that within MOUs or other agreements, whatever that agreement might be, understanding how we're going to support one another to support our community members. We have to remember that a lot of times you might be working in housing, and then you might be working with somebody that's working in restorative justice, and then you might be working with somebody that's in the USDA office or whatever it might be, right? Maybe education. But what we got to remember is sometimes we might all be providing supports to an individual, and we might be providing this supports to the same individual, right? Or the same family, or those connections, especially within our tribal communities. Our tribal communities are small. We're connected. And so we want to set our people up for success. And so we do that by coordinating our actions and our roles so that our people can navigate our systems in a better way. Schools, when we're thinking about schools, law enforcement, tribal courts, we think about it in terms of early identification, right, and alternatives. So these are partners that can support that early identification and can intervene, provide intervention before those challenges, before they escalate to crisis or even that justice involvement. And so there's paths along the path. There's opportunities. If we're working together, there's opportunities to intervene. There's opportunities to get back, to help a young person or a family get back on track, get back on that path. This path of life, it's a tough one, and it's easy for us to get distracted and fall off that path. So that's what we're there for as helpers, to try to steer us back to that path. Let's see, using restorative justice circles and traditional peacemaking as diversion pathways. Again, these are interventions that have been developed through cultural knowledge and wisdom that understand relationship. They're based in relationship. They're based in restoration and balance. And so again, they're designed to help young people get back on a good path. Again, I talked a little bit about formalizing those collaborations through MOUs and relationship building meetings. So we're talking about partnerships and partners. It's a real purposeful and intentional relationship that we have to build. And so we think about how we do that. Let's see. So the guiding question here is, how do we work together in ways that keep youth connected, supported, and out of harm's way, right? So again, that kind of question, it helps us be a part of that restorative balance approach. And it keeps us away from a competitive approach of my program is better than this one, or more important than that one, or whatever, right? It's really about how are we working together as partners, as helpers in our community, providing the support and a system of care that's really going to provide opportunities to bring balance and restoration to our young people. So partnerships again, and I love the picture, the image that is on our screen. It shows the web, right? It shows how our resources and our partners, and I only talked about partners in terms of the systems, right? But also we talk about partners and acknowledge the systems of our family systems, our clan systems, our other systems that we have in our tribal traditional ways and understanding of the world. Learning about them and how to support one another. We're all a part of that web. We all hold a string. And when one part of that string is pulled, it impacts the whole web. It impacts the community. So again, as we're developing the system of care, that's a wonderful philosophy and image to keep in mind, because we want to show up as in that relationship, right? As a partner, we want to show up and ask ourselves, how are we carrying ourselves in this relationship? It could be as a clinician, it could be as the program manager of a program or a department, whatever your role is. What is your role in the relationship within this system that we're developing? So I think that's all that I have as far as my talking points. But I want to toss it back to my co-presenters if there's anything else that they would like to add.
I really like the way that you described asking for information from a person in terms of like screening and how you're entering a sacred space. And I think we need to return to that concept of we're entering into a relationship and we're asking, some very sensitive information. So I really appreciate that, Toshka. Thank you. And thank you for all of your information. So how do we document all of this? Toshka mentioned data, and how we can use that data to see if what we're doing is working. And we all have had some background in gathering data, maybe even interpreting data. But what are the community defined indicators? So, for example, I'll give you an example from the Lakota people. So, one of the indicators that I see is, and go back to kinship again, in the Lakota language, it's wotakuye. So, like, say, if I go into a store locally on my Pine Ridge Reservation, or one of the border towns, Rapid City, Gordon, if I see another Lakota person, then most likely I won't be acknowledged. And I will try to acknowledge, like say, hello, how you doing? Just to create that, we're relatives, even if we're not relatives. Um, but most likely I'll get a kind of like a confused look, like, do I know you? Or if I do use a kinship term, like say younger people, then I'll say Toshka, which is nephew, or Toja, which is niece, or grandchildren. I'll say Takoja if they're about the age of my grandchildren. Then I'll say, hello, Takoja. And then they might say to their mom or dad, who is that woman? She called me something. And they might say, oh, well, she's just calling you grandchild. Is she my grandmother? Like that. So the indicator is that at one time it was very common to see everybody as a relative and to acknowledge everybody as a relative. And a lot of times relatives, when they seen each other, they would shake hands. The women would even give each other hugs and cry. And it was common, to really value that relationship. But now, the indicator is that, we will walk right by each other. We won't acknowledge each other. And in fact, some of the boundaries have been crossed, and there might be unhealthy, dangerous, harmful expressions of, how we relate to one another. So that is an example that I can think of as a community-defined indicator. Being a Lakota person, then you understood that kinship was very important. And we were taught that, so whenever I was growing up, I was not able to call anybody by their first name. And in fact, I had to address everybody by a kinship term, whether we were related or not. And so it was drilled into me, that these are relatives and you don't, you observe and treat them as such. So think about that. What are your community defined indicators? For example, belonging, participation, hope. So I'll give you another example. We have children's healing camps every summer, and we had a round dance, and there was a young man, a young boy, I should say, that would not participate. He would not get up and dance. And every time I went by him, I would turn around and smile at him, and I would wave my hand and I would say, come on, Takoja, let's dance. And he would put his head down and he would ignore me. Every time I went around, finally he looked up at me and he shook his head no. So I thought, oh, I'm getting a response. And then about the sixth time that we went around, when I put out my hand, then he got up and he took my hand and he danced. He got into the circle and he danced. So what does that say about, in terms of an indicator? If we are persistent, if we use our own culturally based, culturally grounded ways of being, life ways, then we can impact, not only our youth, but our families. So look at how you're documenting and how you're how would you say, measuring. I hate to say measure because that sounds like I don't know, that doesn't sound right. But how can you document? So for example, stories and numbers. Can you use stories and numbers to demonstrate impact and secure funding for what you want to do? So another example might be my grandson learned to harvest sage when he was little, and he was taught to not pull the sage out by their roots, and he was taught why. And he was taught about, that the sage has a spirit. And so what we did was we made sure that he would share that with his friends and his relatives that went out and gathered sage. So it's almost like it grew, like by teaching one, then, that story was passed on, then the practice was put in place. And then now, we have a lot of people that know, the young people know not how to harvest sage. So that's a way to demonstrate the impact. And I don't know about securing funding, but that's an example. Documenting cultural practices as legitimate interventions and outcomes. That's something I think that's very personal culturally and very, how would you say, sensitive. So if we're going to be documenting, cultural practices as interventions, what does that mean? At the surface level, for example, one of the in my community, we started a program to use more Lakota culturally based mental health interventions. And we used a scenario. The scenario was about a young person that had numerous suicide attempts, self-harm, was not in school, had a lot of risk behaviors. And so, whenever we presented this to the community that was developing the Lakota culturally based program, we said, well, what is the first thing that we need to do given this scenario with this young person? And some of them, the clinicians said, well, we need to do an assessment, which isn't a wrong answer. But an elder said very strongly, we need to gigna. And in Lakota, that means comfort. We need to comfort this young person because of what they've been through and what they are going through. So that could be deemed a cultural practice. Among the Lakota people, to gigana somebody is to comfort them, but not in terms of just giving them a hug or, having some words, but giving them water, maybe giving them space. What are those culturally based interventions that you can identify and that you can put into place that come from your people? So just some examples there. And I know that are we at time here? So let's go to the next slide. So let's do some action planning and reflection. What is one practical strategy you can implement in your community within 90 days? And I'm going to ask you to put this in the chat, okay? What is one practical strategy you can implement in your community within 90 days? And again, this is related to addressing the challenges of mental health risks, mental health needs of our tribal, our native youth. And we can even say families. So what is one practical strategy you can implement in your community within 90 days, within the next 3 moons? Then what can you um, put into place. So while you're thinking about that and putting it into the chat, then consider which partnerships or advisory roles could amplify your efforts, could support you in terms of implementing this practical strategy. And then finally, how can traditional knowledge, your own cultural traditional knowledge, inform justice prevention for youth? So what we're hoping for is that we have given you some food for thought, that we have given you some maybe some inspiration by, all of our wonderful presenters, what they talked about, in terms of addressing mental health needs among our tribal youth and juvenile delinquency prevention. That is a term that I would say youth risk prevention, not being involved in the justice system. So think about that. And I know you're all just writing away. Let me look at the chat. Oh, there's nothing there. um, I'm thinking, that these are questions that you can reflect on and plan for among your own circles, wherever you're at. If you can think of anything to put in the chat, we'd appreciate hearing from you. If not, then you can, email tribal youth. Let me see here. Okay, we do have some. Thank you so much. Identify natural helpers and other shared decision makers in 3 tribes that want to have a youth wellness court. Wonderful. Within 90 days, we're going to identify natural helpers and other shared decision makers in 3 tribes that want to have a youth wellness court. So beautiful. And of course, we at the Tribal Youth Resource Center are glad to help in any way that we can to help you realize that, help you implement, plan, develop. We are already working to hire a justice experience clinician for our program, as well as choosing a criminogenic risk, needs, responsivity assessment tool. But I would also like to bring an elder on board in a more formal way. Wonderful. Yes, the elders have much lived experience and can really give wonderful, wise input to what you're working on. Conduct a consensus workshop with partners to identify shared values. Yes. What are our shared values? What is it that we can start from? What is our foundation? So with that, I'm looking at our time and I'm going to turn it over. Thank you so much, Toshka, Courtney, Jen, and Linda. And I'm turn it over to Toshka Jordan. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't know, I just can't express enough gratitude for, having Courtney and